Hello everyone, I'm Sebastian Y, and this is Foundations of Economics. In this video, I'm going to talk about thinking like an economist. This will include how economists use models and introducing our first economic model. What it means to think like an economist, especially in the context of this class, is to think about three different things. Descriptions in words. We're going to talk about different examples as we go throughout this course and talk about them. We're also going to use math, that is, equations, do some simple calculations, and finally, graphs. Graphs are of critical importance to understanding economics. The sooner you are able to embrace the drawing of graphs, the easier a time that you're going to have learning everything that we're going to be doing. What we mean by thinking like an economist is to understand all three of these things, but beyond that, understand that they're all talking about the same thing. As we go through examples, I'm going to try to emphasize using the math, talking about it, drawing the graph, all surrounding the exact same problem, but just showing these different ways that we can approach it. Once you understand the relationship between these three things, it gets a lot easier. Let's talk a little bit about economic modeling. Models give economists a way to simplify what we see in the real world and try to think about it in a mathematical and organized way. An important part of models are the assumptions. Models are present in all kinds of sciences, not just economics. For example, in physics and chemistry, you have the Bohr model of the atom, which comes with all kinds of assumptions, and many of which are not realistic to how things are in real life, but they help us get our head around what's going on. Economists do the exact same thing. Assumptions simplify things down to the point where we are able to do the math and come to some conclusions. Once we've done that, we can start to assess the assumptions and think about whether or not they're realistic and how much is gained or lost by these assumptions. One of the most important assumptions that we make in economics is rationality. Rationality means that agents in economic models are actively seeking out what is best for them. Do we think this is a reasonable assumption? Maybe not always. People don't always behave in a rational way. But it does make things substantially easier when we're doing the analysis. Rationality is a really good starting point, and once we have gotten that down, we can start to think about, well, what happens when people do not behave rationally? Another assumption that we make is the short run versus the long run. We don't define the short run and long run with any specific amount of time. Rather, we assume that in the short run, there's a lot of things that can't be changed. Things like contracts and leases, whereas in the long run, everything can be changed. The long run is just however long it takes to get to that point. Whether we assume we're in the short run or the long run makes a big difference, as we'll see in the coming weeks. Let's talk about our first economic model, and that's what we call circular flow. Circular flow describes the relationship between the two types of decision makers in an economy. That is, the households, that's individual people like you and me, and the firms. Firms are the organizations and companies that produce things in the economy. Households own the factors of production. What is a factor of production? Well, it's any kind of resource that's used to produce things. The biggest one would be labor. As a member of a household, you own some labor that can be used to produce things. Households also own land that might be rented out in order to produce things. At the same time, households consume goods and services. On the other side of things, the firms use the factors of production to produce goods and services. We're going to put those two sides of the economy and everything we've talked about into one diagram called circular flow. We'll put the firms over here. We'll put the households over here. The firms and households interact with each other in markets. We have two different types of markets. We have markets for goods and services, and we have markets for factors of production. I'm going to use a red line to show the flow of things. We know that households buy goods and services, so they're going to go into the market for goods and services, buy those. We know that the goods and services are produced by firms, so firms are going to sell goods and services in the market for goods and services to the households. Households own the factors of production, so they're going to bring those into the market for the factors of production, which are going to be bought by the firms. I'm going to use a green arrow to show the flow of money. Households buy goods and services, so money is going out of the households into the market for goods and services and into the firms. Firms are buying factors of production, so money is going to go from the firms to the factors of production and back into the households. Let's talk about a quick example. Suppose that you want to buy a cup of coffee. That's a good. You're going to go out into the market, say to Starbucks, and you're going to buy that cup of coffee from them. The goods and services, the coffee is flowing from Starbucks, a firm, to you, a household, and your money is flowing the opposite way. But how did that cup of coffee come to be? The firm had to produce it. And in order to produce it, they needed to use factors of production, namely labor. They needed to hire a person to make the cup of coffee for you. And they did that by going to the market for factors of production, in this case the labor market, and hiring a person. That person is a member of a household. And so you can see how money flows in a circular way from households to firms and back to households, and inputs and outputs flow the other direction. This is, of course, a very, very simple way to represent the economy. As we move forward, we're going to get into more detail and models that have a lot more going on, but this is always a good place to start.